Now we start moving towards step 2. Once you've thought of all those initial issues, you really haven't done anything yet. You're thinking about, okay, here's the idea. You're thinking about how you're going to move your idea forward, how you're going to set up the business. You actually got to start writing it down. And there's really 2 stages to the business plan, and this is why 1 and 2 get gray here. We could argue that before you ever write a business plan, which is a document that is much more than a book. It's a living document that you create, that you internalize. In other words, this is your plan that you created, that you're going to follow, and that you can use as a roadmap to success, as opposed to someone writing a book for you. A lot of people say, well, I'll get someone to write me a business plan. That's no good. You need to be able to create a business plan that's yours. Before you actually get into that, though, because a business plan is a fairly extensive document, what you probably want to do is to do a pre-business plan. And what I call a pre-business plan is really, in step 1, the evaluation part of the opportunity. And that's just a fancy word. Sometimes we use, that's an unfancy word for a fancy word that we often use, which is a feasibility analysis. Okay? And what we're doing, kind of, step 1.5, I'll call it, is we're going to do a feasibility plan to see if it's even worth going any further ahead. So we're doing an initial business plan that's not a full-blown business plan, but it's an initial cut to say, is this worth pursuing? Okay, so that's really what you're looking at with this next stage. So when we look at evaluating the business here, moving the business forward, we got to look at what's known as quality and quantity information. Quality or qualitative data is touchy-feely information. Is this something that has the look and feel of something that's going to be successful? And then we have to look at it from a quantity perspective, and we use what's called quantitative data there, and that's number-related data, to say, can this business idea potentially make money for us? So it's an initial cut. This initial cut certainly helps kind of figure out, is this worth moving forward? So before writing a business plan, entrepreneurs engage in an opportunity assessment process to determine if the idea has some degree of merit. Opportunity assessment consists of a qualitative assessment and a detailed quantitative analysis. After completing a full assessment of the idea, entrepreneurs will decide whether or not to proceed with the business plan. So it's like step 1.5, I'll call it. And this is what I consider to be probably the thing that a lot of people lose sight of in a business plan, is they say, oh, we write a business plan, then we're all set. But we really need to do an initial cut first. And that initial cut is really going to answer some basic questions related to this idea of, is this something worth pursuing? So we think about what are some of the things that we need to address. And again, they're holdbacks to what we've already looked at yesterday. First of all, we got to figure out, what are our goals here? What is it that we want to do as individuals with this business? What do we want to achieve? How much income do we need? Okay, if you're coming out of a job that makes $100,000 a year, you're certainly going to want to make more than $100,000 a year. That only makes sense. Okay, so that would be a goal. If you're coming out of a job where you're working 12 hours a day, you're probably not going to be wanting to work 18 hours a day. Now, some people will, but you got to kind of think about that beforehand. You say, how much time am I willing to put into this? How much money am I willing to put into this? How deep will I draw the well down? So we need to kind of set your goals first, and that's ultimately a key step to be able to determine whether you should move forward on this or not. We also think about the content of the work. Is this a suitable business idea for me? Let's say, for example, me, and I want to start a business, and the business idea is a hockey school. Now, I'll be the first to admit that my knowledge of hockey does not go very deep. I'm not a hockey player. I can watch it casually. I know generally the rules of the game, but I'm no hockey expert. And me to start a hockey school, I'm probably not the best person to teach hockey skills. Okay? So the context of the work is really something that would have to be a key strength of yours. So what is it that you do really well? Does this business really support what you do really well? Or is this something you have no knowledge about? And if you have no knowledge about it, you have to really ask yourself, is this something that I should do? Now, anyone can learn and anyone can commit to something, but let's be serious. You have to ask yourself, am I willing to commit to it? The lifestyle. And this is something a lot of people ignore too. Consider these questions. What type of lifestyle will your business allow? Will the hours be long? Will the business allow family members to be involved? Too many people I know who started a business have not answered this question before they started the business. How much time are you willing to put into it? Is this weekend work? Do you want to give up your weekends? Is it a 7-day operation? Philip Mercer noted in his little audio track that I played for you, it said he worked for 3 years without a day off. Are you prepared to do that? You know, that's quite realistic in terms of what to expect. And if the lifestyle doesn't fit that, many families have disintegrated under the stress of starting a business. And if you feel that, you know, that's something you don't want to risk, you should stop right there. Capabilities, and again, this goes back to the content of the work. In addition to personal characteristics needed to run a small business, good mental health, physical health. Second requirement is the expertise in the fundamentals of management, including administration, marketing, and finance. And I find many entrepreneurs just lack that ability. And again, the great thing is that you can learn that stuff, okay? But you have to commit to learn. And experience. Potential entrepreneurs may want to consider starting a business when they get a little bit more experience in it. If they don't have experience in it, it makes it very difficult. So those are some things that you really have to, and those are hard questions. Those are hard questions that initial feasibility analysis, I'll call it, initial cut, really need to be soul searched to say, yeah, I'm willing to do that, or no, I'm not. You want to be able to discuss the following. Again, it relates to this same thing. What product or service will I provide? How will the business offer value to customers? What is in it for the customer as opposed to what's in it for you? You can easily see what's in it for you. Oh, I'm going to make a lot of money. But will customers buy from you? Is there some benefit that you offer that a customer will look at and say, yeah, I'd like to? How will you enter the market? And again, you think about, is it a family business, start my own, buy someone else's, franchise? And is there a competitive advantage? Do you have some ability? Are you bringing something to this business that you don't? Think about Don Cherry, for example, starting Don Cherry's restaurant. What does Don Cherry know about restaurants? Probably nothing. But Don Cherry is a name that people recognize. And if you're going to start a sports bar or a sports grill, Don Cherry and sports are connected. So certainly Don Cherry would look at it and say, yeah, that's something I could do. That's something I could do. But I need help with the cooking and that sort of thing. But really, to sell the name, Don Cherry certainly is a useful tool for selling that sort of thing. Who will the customers be? Who are they in terms of what are their age, where do they live, what's their lifestyle, just basic demographic information. Will they buy from you? Is there a reason that they're going to buy from you? Will they buy from Amazon? This is something that many of the small businesses in Clarenville face right now. They say, I see the Shop Local campaign, which gets on my nerves because really it says it gives me no reason to shop local other than the fact that I should. So it guilts me into shopping local. But what do the local offer that Amazon doesn't? What are some of the advantages? Why should I? So that kind of thing that you need to think about in terms of your business is, why will people buy from you? What do you bring to the table that they should avail of? We think about assessing the industry environments you'll be operating in. What's the state of the economy? What's the economic trends? Who are our competitors? What advantages and disadvantages are there? What are the key success factors for your business? These are pretty simple, important, but simple concepts that you can do in an initial feasibility analysis But you have to answer them honestly. There's no sense in fudging. How will you market? How will you market your product or service? You know, the 4 Ps. What? It's price, the place, the promotion, and the product. How are you going to do this? Where are you going to get suppliers to? What will your cost be, particularly with regards to the cost of the raw material? Will suppliers sell to you? Will they offer you good credit? And what would startup cost be? You know, startup cost is really something you really need to consider. How much does it cost to start this business? And if you spend all your money in startup and you have no money to get you through that first year or two that your business is going to have to grow, your business is not going to survive. So you need enough money not only to get it started, but to manage it through the first couple of years, because it's going to be a lean couple of years to start with. Okay. So again, you say to yourself, okay, if I can get past that hurdle, let's assume that you pass that, you pass those questions, or you answer those questions, then you're going to say, well, how am I going to get into the market? You know, are you offering a brand new product into the market, or is it an existing product? If it's a brand new product, people are probably not familiar with it. You know, if I'm selling you non-fungible NFTs, non-fungible transactions, I think they're called, and you say to me, what's an NFT? I said, I don't know. I just pulled it out of my head. You know, that's a new product. We're going to hear tell NFTs as we go along. It has something to do with selling photographs or pictures and over online, while at the same time retaining the copyright to them. Okay, so it's kind of a loosey-goosey thing that most people don't understand. It's sort of like Bitcoin. How are you going to sell that new product? People don't understand it. You need to be able to explain it to people. Buddy of mine, he sells online. He sells solar, wind, that sort of thing. You know, most people just don't understand electricity, solar power, what the limits of it are, what the pluses of it are, these sorts of things. So it requires a lot of sit down and explain the concepts before you try to sell your products. Are you selling fad or novelty products? Is this something that'll be here today, gone tomorrow? I think of Crocs. All of us remember Crocs. You know, is there a market for Crocs now? Is there really need for that type of product? This time of the year, you know, we look at our year now, and Canadian Tire might have 1,000 snowblowers up there. Who's bought a snowblower lately? Why? And the second approach is really to look at offering an existing product. Okay, I'm selling you wood, or house construction, or plumbing, or machinist. You know, these are existing products. People know what they are. The great thing is that your market will be familiar with what you're selling. The bad thing is that your market is familiar with what you're selling, and there's a lot of people selling the same thing. So, you know, that's the thing. The third way is really the way that most companies try to get into the market, and that's to enter the market to offer a product or service similar to what already exists, so people are knowledgeable about it, but something slightly different. There's some extra to it, or something different. Okay, so the market sees your product as differentiated. The differentiation comes from this idea of something called a strategic competitive advantage. In other words, you take a product into the market that people are familiar with and that other people sell. But your product is better, recognizably better by the consumer. The consumer has to appreciate the difference, okay? So an entrepreneur can save valuable time and energy by identifying the most appropriate areas in which to develop the advantage. So the right industry, the right business, the right aspect of the business to focus on. So how is your product different? Apple, for example. Okay, so this wonderful little tool there. What did Apple do? Well, Apple created a cell phone. Wow, there was plenty of cell phones around. No big deal. Oh no, in 2007, it seems like I'm saying 2007, when Apple came out with the first iPhone, people looked at it and said, well, that's interesting. Okay, it's a phone. But Apple demonstrated that it does something different. It allows you to run apps. These apps are useful tools, When people found out about the apps and the connectability, the usability, the ease of use, these sorts of things, suddenly the iPhone changed an industry, okay? It was an existing product. Cell phones existed before the iPhone. But this one brought in significant advantages. And it was a competitive advantage in the sense that it was different and better than anyone else produced. There's been lots of competitors since. No doubt about it, every phone now mimics the Apple, okay? But what does Apple do that's a competitive advantage? Well, their competitive advantage is still ease of use. Apple is the original concept of Apple back in 1984 when I started using Apple Macintosh. The original concept still holds true today. Keep it simple, stupid. The KISS principle is really what's used. So Apple to this day do not allow too many buttons on their products. You'll see that an iPhone, for example, and if you have a newer iPhone, it doesn't even have a belly button on it anymore. That's been taken off. So we had to gather all of this information in order to be able to demonstrate to us and to demonstrate to the consumer that our product has some significant difference over every other product and that it brings some value. So we need to be able to find an industry, find a product, find an idea that allows us to do that. It's no point in making the same thing that everybody else is making or doing the same thing everyone else is doing unless we can define how we're different. So that's the trick. And if we don't know what the market is and what the market wants by doing some market research or doing these sorts of things, it's very difficult to be able to hold it up as different. Where do we get that data? Well, we know from our market research. Some of you have done the market research course, others haven't, but basically market research allows us to find out what is it that people want, what is it that people value. And we can do this by two collection methods. First is collecting secondary data. Secondary data is data that already exists out there. Either we've collected it in the past or someone else has collected it. We've gone out and we've got that data, and it's basically free for the taking out there. The fact that we've got Google attached to us all now, we can collect secondary data hand over fist. It's no sweat, relatively, to collect secondary data. But secondary data comes with some challenges. You know, everybody has access to it, yeah, but does it fit your needs exactly? Probably not, because you never ask the questions. You're relying on someone else to ask the questions. Did they ask the questions that you want to ask? Were they exactly the same questions? Were the measurements the same? How old is the data? These sorts of things come into play. The most important form of data, which comes after you do secondary will help drive you to ask more questions, is primary data. And primary data is data you collect yourself. That takes time, energy, and effort to collect because you're the one responsible for collecting it. And the methodologies for collecting it can be challenging because you need to be able to gather it in such a way that you can use it to be useful. We look at secondary data information just kind of a little bit deeper because it's the one that we tend to look at primarily in our feasibility analysis. Okay, feasibility analysis, this initial cut that we're talking about, this between steps 1 and 2, is to kind of evaluate whether the business is worth even pursuing. This is not a business plan. This is kind of a first cut to say, yeah, this is something we can do or this is something we don't. You're going to be relying heavily on secondary data. And secondary data is taken from reports, studies, statistics, all kinds of stuff that you can take a look at. A great deal of secondary data is available to the entrepreneur, and collecting it is usually pretty inexpensive. Major problem, however, is finding information that's relevant to your particular situation. Secondary data is inexpensive, which makes it very attractive to the prospective buyer, and much of the secondary information is available by federal and provincial governments. Okay, so I just wanted to just kind of give you an example here that we're going to take a look at ourselves now. We're going to duplicate this concept for us here locally. Here's an example of how secondary data can be used in order to kind of evaluate whether a business is worthwhile pursuing or not. So what we're doing is assessing the market feasibility of opening a bookstore in Toronto by using secondary data, okay? So this is an example that can right out of your book, and just to show you the process. So we got to estimate the size of the market for a Toronto bookstore. First of all, we're going to determine the population of Toronto. So Toronto has about 5.5 million people, Greater Metropolitan Toronto, the GTA. And that data is available through Statistics Canada. You can find that data online. Then we're going to ask ourselves, how many families in Toronto? And we're going to divide population by 3. Because we're going to look at it in terms of our unit of measure is going to be families as opposed to individuals. So if you look at Statistics Canada, you'll find that the average household in Ontario is 3 people. So we divide that by 3, that gives us 1.8 million families. And how much is the total bookstore sales in Toronto? Again, Stats Canada keeps information on that kind of thing. So we know that the average family spends $300 on books and magazines per year based on Stats Canada data. So we can calculate the total market size for books and magazines in Toronto at about $500 million, $549 million. Okay. So this shows the total for Toronto. So that's interesting. We can figure out, we can make assertions based on that. Now, what I want to do is do the same thing for here locally. And what I mean by here locally, I'm going to pick Clarenville. So locally is really dependent on where you live. But for the purposes of this example, I'm going to do this exact same thing here, but use Clarenville. Okay. The very first thing we need to do is determine the population of Clarenville. Okay. So where are we going to find that information to? Well, let me just switch. So here I am on my Google, and I'm going to look for Clarenville population. Okay, so you can put that in, and it comes up with about 6,300 people. Where did that data come from? Let's scroll down here. Look at this, Stats Canada. Now, it's important to know where your data is coming from. Usually, any data that's produced by a government, you would consider to be, particularly in a North American government, to be accurate data. So this is the census profile, 2016 census. Now, right off the bat, you need to see one of the challenges with secondary data. 2016 census. That's 5 years ago. Is that data relevant today? Well, it isn't, frankly. It's getting old. Now, I do know that Stats Canada is going to publish the census data for 2020 because the data is collected every 5 years. 2021, sorry. The data is collected every 5 years, and they're going to publish the 2021 data on February 9th. Okay, so it's not February 9th yet, so this is as close as we got. So we're going to come back, I'm going to come back here on February 9th and look at this data. But for the purposes of our illustration, we recognize that the closest, most up-to-date data we have is 2016, which is getting old. But let's just take a look at it here. This data is quite extensive. They'll give you population, private dwellings, population density, land area. They take the age characteristics and they break it down by division, population by how many people from 0 to 14, 0 to 4, 0, all kinds of, it's a phenomenal bit of information. This is really good for market research because it breaks it down into 5-year categories. It will also give you household and dwelling characteristics, types of houses. It will give you marital status. It will give you family characteristics. And, we're going to see that, for example, the average size of census families is 2.8. I'll come back to that in a minute. The couples per child, household type, official languages, and this is where it gets deep here. You can see that primarily English. Mother tongue, now this goes on and on. Mother tongue goes on and on and on and on. You notice that we're a pretty homogeneous group here. We're all English, British background. Here we got, more. I'm not down at the bottom. You keep on going down here. This is quite extensive. This exists for every town, by the way. This is just not Clarendon. Other languages spoken, income, okay? So this income data for 2015, it will give you the number of people, how much money they make on average. It will give you information with regards to the percentage breakdown of income. It will give you information to where the income came from. We call them economic families here. Keep on going down, you will see how many people are low income. Knowledge of languages. And again, this language thing, Stats Canada really goes deep into that. Immigration. How old were you when you immigrated? Recent immigrants, where they came from. Aboriginals. Visible minorities. Ethnic origin. Household characteristics, which is important. Okay. Education level. Major. Location of study. Labor force status, whether they're employed or not. Occupation. Industry. Place of work. Commuting. Main mode of commuting. Commuting duration. Language used at work. And again, that goes down through a deep mobility status. So you can see that, man, Stats Canada collects a huge amount of information. For our purposes in this little example, the little example asks, the Toronto example. So, okay, well, look, if we look at it, we're asking what is the population of the Clarenville area. So we're going to use this number of 6291, okay? 6,291. So that's the first issue. The second issue that we asked in this little survey was the number of people in a family. And we saw, again, based on the statistical, that the average family size, I got to go down through it, is 2.8 was the number that we had. There it is there, average size of the census family, 2.8. The other issue was total bookstore sales. Now, total bookstore sales for Toronto. And this is taken from the Average Household Market Research Handbook. Now, I don't have at the ready the Market Research Handbook that has this. Okay, this is something that you have to pay for, but there is such a thing as a Market Research Handbook that you can get, and I'm sure this information is online too, but you may have to pay for it. That's the trick. You can get some data, and a lot of the data that is older is free and available online. Okay, so I'm not going to dig into that, but I'm saying that that's there. What we'll use is the same number again. So let's just switch you back now. Using the same methodology for Clarenville, what we can say, I'll just bring this down, okay? What we can say then for Clarenville is that, well, for Clarenville, we know there's 6,291 people. We also know that the average population size for Clarenville, or household size, I should say, 2.8. So this is, I'll just say here, Clarendon. Okay. And instead of digging hard at the numbers, let's assume that we went and did this research and we found that the number is exactly the same. So let's just use this same data that they use for Toronto, because again, I'm sure it won't be that much off that. So it's a reasonable estimate. So we've got a reasonable estimate. So effectively, what we're doing now is doing the same calculation for the Clarenville area. So what I'm going to do is take 6291, and I'm going to divide it by 2.8 because the average household size is 2.8. So that's 2,247. So that's 2,247 households. We assume then that if there's $300 per household, okay, so we're going to take that number and we're going to multiply it by 300 per household. $300. That's $674,000. So essentially, in the Clarenville area, then, if we were to ask the same question, the total book sales, books and magazine sales per year, based on this data and based on the assumption of 300 per year, would be $674,000. And that's effectively how we can employ secondary data to kind of give us a number. Well, what is the total market out there? Okay, so we're really estimating our total market. So now that we've done that, we can actually go on to say, well, how much of the market do we have? Now, this requires some manipulating of the data. You get the secondary data, for example, how many people, how many families, how many people in a household, how much per year spent. You take that data and you manipulate it in order to be able to make that calculation. And that's effectively what you're doing with all of this secondary research. It's using it in order to be able to make some decisions on. Primary data is, as I say, stuff you go out and collect on your own. So it's collected through your own research, although usually more costly to obtain the secondary data, and this is the nick of it. It is expensive. It can be more relevant because it's timely. It is now. It is the age of it is now, right? Primary research is essential if secondary doesn't exist. You want to start, for example, we did talked about the brewing company, the Port Rexton Brewery, and they had this exact same problem. They were doing some preliminary research, and they asked, well, you know, what is the average sale of draft or beer from these little beer operations in Newfoundland? And effectively, there was no such beast in Newfoundland. There was no data available on Newfoundland statistics for the average sales that people would have to buy, what people would normally buy in terms of craft beer. So they had to use data from other parts of the country, which they were a little bit scared of because the fact is it's not Newfoundland. But there was no primary data. So primary data is really good if you got nothing. And they had nothing. So they had to use a lot of primary data. So there's some advantages to it, but small business owners have traditionally hesitated because it's so darn hard to collect. Now, the internet, social media, that sort of thing has helped. But are you getting good representative sample? If we think about market research, some of you have done market research says you need to get what's called representative samples. One thing to ask people who are interested in buying beer, if they were going to buy beer, but what portion of the population are they? Are they 50% of the population, 30%, 10%, 2%, 1%? So you really need to get a representative sample which represents the population as a whole. So what else can we do in order to pull down primary data? You know, primary data is hard to get. Well, there's three basic sources of primary data. Three basic ways to collect it, I should say. There's, first and foremost, observation. Observation is watching the world go by. Observation involves monitoring the who, what, where, when, and how of related market conditions. So observation is often used as a tool. Now, I'll give you an example of a little bit of observational research that I did.
When it comes to cars, it seems like in North America at least, most things are black and white. I was doing a bit of research online, thinking about what kind of marketing research problem I would consider to show you as an example. I did run across a great bit of information that occurred in the Globe and Mail, and there they reported that the top 2 selling cars in North America, car colors that is black and white. So, given the black and white scenario, I wanted to check to see if the people of Clarenville, Newfoundland more or less fit the same mold as the rest of North America. Are black and white cars the most common cars on the road? So what I'm going to do today is a little bit of an observational technique where we're going to take, all of us are going, we're going to take a little quick view of Clarenville and to see if the hypothesis that, you know, the top 2 cars are either black or white, the top 2 colors. So come along, let's see what we can do here. Hey, black, white. I think we're off to a good start. Let's do it. In terms of an observational study, one of the best places to look would be the car lots in town. What are the types of cars that car dealerships are getting come in? So if we took a look, we could count to see how many cars are there, and of that, how many cars are black and white. I'll do that very quickly here now. So let's go.
If we take a quick look at this dealership, you can see that we've got black, black, black. And here we have another dealership, and you can see white and black and blue and black and gray and blue and red and black. So now we got a brown, white, brown, white, brown, blue, white, brown, gray, black, purple, red and gray, kind of a green, white,
White. So here I am stood up at one of the busiest intersections in Clarenville. At this point in time, what I'm trying to do is to measure the type of traffic that's going through in terms of what color they are. If I stood here for an amount of time, say for example 2 hours, I would probably count 1,000 cars. I could also calculate what color they are. Based on my observational research of watching cars naturally flow through, and I would assume that it would be a representative population of Clarenville, I could determine whether or not the hypothesis that I had stated, that black and white cars are the 2 most popular colors, I could determine if that was in fact the case. That would in turn give me some ammunition to argue in my conclusions that yes, black and white cars, like the rest of North America, are the 2 most popular colors in Clarenville.
Okay, we're back in the office. So we've gone out, we've collected our observational research. Now we need to think about how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? And what is the overall strategy here? Well, again, I want to remind you of the stages of the marketing research process. We have problem discovery, which is our initial stages, and in the problem discovery in this particular case, I said, well, one of the things we need to do is determine the top 2 color cars relative to the North American standard. And in order to be able to make it measurable, we need really to be very specific with regards to our hypothesis. So what I've done is I've created a hypothesis here, and effectively my hypothesis says the color frequency of cars in the town of Clarenville is the same as the color frequency in the rest of North America. More specifically, black and white vehicles make up close to 43%, plus or minus 2%, of the car colors in Clarenville. So again, I have set a standard there that is measurable, and it's very important that you do that when you create a hypothesis, because what you need to be able to do is do all your research to prove or disprove the hypothesis. So that's our first step. We've set about a hypothesis that effectively says Clarenville is no different than anywhere else in North America. We've gone out and we've done our observational research. Now we could also do a survey research, and I'll show you a little brief on this idea of the concept of a survey. So just let me take you there for a second. When we do a survey, one of the things that's important is that we get a representative sample of the people in our community. Our hypothesis stated that we're concerned about the people of Clarenville. That then will be the population. What we need to be able to do is to survey them, take a small sample of them in order to make a determination that we could apply to the population as a whole. It's a bit of a challenge in order to do a survey because one of the things we need to do is to get that representativeness. One of the things we can do is to put everyone's name in a hat and pull out however many, 100, 200, and go and survey those. That would be very complicated and somewhat cumbersome. So we have to make some sort of a compromise. We want to be able to get really good issues with regards to a probability sample, meaning that everyone has an equal chance to be selected. However, we have to recognize that we have time, money, and other constraints that come into play. So what I would suggest we do with this is we create a survey question and we simply send it out over the internet and get people to do it. Now that's what's called a non-probability sample. A non-probability sample means not everyone has an equal opportunity to be selected. When you consider that not everyone in Clarenville is on the internet, not everyone is connected to me sending it out, or I don't have everyone's email addresses, that would certainly indicate that no, we're not going to get a good representative sample. Further, people may not send it back. There could be a bunch of issues. However, if we are okay with that, if we say, okay, we're looking to get a gist of the problem or a gist of the situation, then I think that this type of approach would work just fine. So what we're going to do, here's the plan, is we're going to create a survey, and the survey question would be a single question that we're going to send out, and that single question will be built upon the North American statistics that we got for car colors. Essentially, the question would ask, select the color of the car that you most often drive. We'd send it out to people in Clarenville. The people in Clarenville would select one of those responses, send it back. We then would calculate the results. Now, using a computer program, particularly a piece of software that's designed to do surveying, such as fluidsurveys.com, we could go and do this, and it would actually not only send the survey out, but it would also calculate the results for us. That would be great. And then we can make some conclusions. I'm just going to put that aside, though, and carry on with our observational bit of research that we did. You saw that I was out and we counted the cars. And in the observation, what we're doing is looking at a certain number of cars. In this particular instance, I saw 129 cars today when I went out. Of those 129 cars, I have shown to you, I'll show to you now the statistics on what I got on that. You will notice that based on my observation, 29% of the cars were white, 16% were black, 10% were silver, 10% were gray, and the others were 40% made up other colors. So again, I'm most concerned about the top two. The basic conclusion that I can draw just looking at it alone is that, yeah, white and black are the most popular colors. But keep in mind that I stated a hypothesis, and the hypothesis was very clear. Not that it had to be the most, it had to be the most by about the same amount as North America. So I need to check my hypothesis. So my findings indicated, when I combined the white and black, my findings indicated that black and white vehicles made up 45% of the cars observed in Clarenville today in the time period that I used. My hypothesis stated that black and white vehicles make up close to 43, plus or minus 2% of the car colors in Clarenville. Well, looking at my findings and looking at the hypothesis, I would conclude that I will accept the hypothesis, meaning that Clarenville is on par with North America. Indications are that it is on par with North America.
Effectively, what I wanted to show in that was this observational research and how observational research can be a useful tool. And I use this Clarenville car example just to kind of illustrate it. We also have surveys you can do. Now, surveys, everyone likes doing surveys. The question is how you get good information out of a survey. And we talked about in the market research course, are you getting a representative sample? So basically, if you send out a survey, how do you know that the people that are sending it back represent your general buyer? If they don't, the information that you get is not going to be any use. So they need to be representative. And the third category that's often used in order to figure out how you're going to draw primary information is test marketing, which is trying it out effectively. And it's an attempt to simulate the actual. So you can start selling your product. For example, if you're making waffles, start selling them at the farm and market. Test market. Do they sell well there? Well, if they sell well there, you might be able to make business out of it. That sort of thing is what you're really looking at, is will that actually fly in terms of a sale? Here's an example of a sample survey and what you need in order to really get a representative sample, okay? Because this is always a question. This is a rule of thumb type of thing. And effectively, if you want to be able to get a sample that represents your general public to a high degree. Now, I know you've all done stats, so this is the 95% confidence. Effectively, 95 out of 100 times, it would be correct. So in order to look at a population sample size that you would need, if your population is 50, the sample size is 44. Wow, that means you'll need a lot of your population. If your population, say for example, is in Clarendon and it's around 5,000, well, let's just roll it out in terms of, you need to be able to collect 375 surveys. So it's still a lot of work. You need to be able, and this has to be a representative sample as opposed to just a sample. So you really, whenever you're doing a survey, it can be quite extensive what you need to do in order to get good information. And you'll get better information if you roll somewhere between, 10,000 and 385. So, you're looking at close to 400 responses that you need to get back. We need to be able to think about it in terms of whether or not you move the business ahead. And you really need to think about it in terms of financial feasibility. And as I showed you there back when we were doing it with regards to the bookstore, $64,000 is as enough money to come in. And there are normally two ways of forecasting sales. In order to be able to calculate that, you can use what's called the build-up method, or you can use the opposite, which is the breakdown, or I'll call it the build-down method. The build-up method or bottom-up method identifies each target market that you would potentially have for your product and estimates what the sale would be, the daily sales would be in each of those target markets. So you could think about, for example, can you sell it to residential customers? That's target market number one. Target market number two is commercial customers. And effectively, you figure out how many you could potentially sell to residential, figure out how much you can sell to residential to commercial. You add the two numbers up, and that then is your total. So you would sell $1,000 for sales to residential, $2,000 to commercial per day. That's $3,000 per day. That's what's known as the build-up method. The other opposite method is the breakdown method, where the entrepreneur may know what the general sales are. So you know generally that you're selling $3,000 a day. How much of it would allocate to you, or how much of it would allocate to each division? So you may not be familiar with the specific target markets. So you begin with a total population and breaks down the large market by eliminating demographics or buyers that would be less likely to purchase. So you kind of work your way down. We know that it's 3,000. I know I'm going to sell it this one and this one. This constitutes this much. And that way I can estimate how much I'm going to sell. So this methodology involves some simple, not too complicated, some simple math. And in order to be able to think about feasibility, you really need to be able to grasp where this is going. So what you're trying to do, what your goal is to say, how much money can my business make? Okay, that's the goal. But in order to get to that goal, you got to be able to figure out what we call the market potential. So the first step is calculating the market potential, which is determine the market area and its population, and break out the geographic area or target market the business will serve. Estimate the population within the market that might conceivably purchase the type of product that you're selling. And this process yields an estimate of the size of the target market. In other words, here's a simple example of thing evaluating the potential feasibility of small business opportunity. This is calculating the market potential for a store or someplace out in Lethbridge, Alberta. So this first step, calculate the market potential. What we do is we calculate what's called the market area first, which is a geographic area. So it's a population of Lethbridge plus outlying regions. This region includes town within 100 kilometers radius of Lethbridge. The population of the total market area is about 200,000. Okay, so and we could do very similar for Clarenville or Timbuktu. Anywhere else, you could do the same thing. So you estimate how many people live in the service area of the business that you're talking about. Then, sales for the market area. The per capita sales for, in this case, pharmacies in the market area can be determined through two sources. First, actual sales figures may be published. Other people might have it already published. Second, the information is not available. Find the per capita sales by taking Canadian and provincial sales of pharmacies divided by the respective population. So this is Stats Canada information. So you can get it locally or you can get it from Stats Canada. So here we've got pharmacy sales in Alberta, for example, in 2009, the population of Alberta in 2009. This will give you a per capita or the dollars sales per person. So that works out at $860. Once the per capita sales have been determined, the number can apply to the market area population. So if our market area population we've turned is $200,000, and we know that there's 860 per, we can do it for, well, they got it broken down here. Lethbridge, population of Lethbridge is 85,000. 860 per person, that's $73 million. The outlying area, basically that's the remaining people, so there's about, it makes up the difference of the 200,000, so that's 115,000 times 860. That's 98,900,000. So if we add those numbers together, 73 million and the 98, 73 and the 98, that would come up and give us the total for the entire market area.